She's fleeing her own sister's wedding, barefoot, her lips bleeding, wearing a tattered silver bridesmaid dress, while her pursuers are the children of senators, the children of men the city bows to. And in the most desperate moment of her life, she looks down at her cracked phone screen, at the name she swore she'd never call again. Lucien Vale, the most dangerous man in New York, the man she's tried to forget for 3 years. Like and comment the city you're viewing from so I know how far my story has come. And stay, because this is just the beginning. The rain came down like it had a grudge. Not the soft kind, not the romantic kind that makes Manhattan look like a movie. The kind that finds every crack in the pavement and turns it into a river. The kind that soaks through a silver bridesmaid dress in 30 seconds flat and makes the fabric cling to your skin like something shameful. Ava Moretti pressed herself against the cold concrete wall behind a flickering maintenance gate at the bottom of the 14th Street subway stairs and tried to remember how to breathe. Her feet were bare. She'd lost the heels somewhere on the stairs. One when the first man grabbed her arm, the other when she'd hit the railing going down. She didn't remember the impact exactly. Just the noise. The crack of something that might have been the railing and might have been her. The burn spreading across her left side where the steel had caught her ribs. The hot copper taste flooding her mouth when her face caught the edge of the last step. She touched her lip with 2 fingers, pulled them back and looked at them in the thin orange glow of an emergency light. Red. Not a lot, but enough. Above her on the platform she could hear them. 3 of them, maybe 4. She'd lost count in the chaos outside the hotel. Sons of political men. Drunk in the way that only people who'd never faced consequences were drunk. Loud, entitled, absolutely certain the world would absorb whatever they chose to do to it. She'd heard the name Crestfield before she ran. Senator Crestfield's kid. The youngest one, who'd been photographed at charity galas since he was 12 and had learned somewhere along the way that photographs and character were entirely different things. She went down here. His voice echoed off the tile. Flat. Annoyed? The way you'd be annoyed if a cab drove away before you could get in. Come on! Ava pulled her knees to her chest and made herself as small as she'd been trained to be. She was good at small. 27 years of practice. She'd been small at the dinner table when her mother pointed out the way her arms looked in sleeveless dresses. Small at family functions when her father introduced Celine first, second, and then seemed to forget there was a second daughter at all. Small in every room she'd ever shared with the Morettis, folding herself into corners, making her laugh quieter, her needs smaller, her existence as close to invisible as a living person could manage. The difference between then and now was that smallness used to feel like protection. Right now it felt like a trap. She looked down at her phone. The screen had a fracture running corner to corner from when she'd hit the ground. She could still see it, just barely. She had 4% battery and 1 bar of signal this deep in the station, and approximately 90 seconds before the men on the platform found the stairs. She scrolled through her contacts. Her sister's name was at the top because C came before everything else. Celine Moretti Ashworth as of 6 hours ago, now that the ceremony was done and the name change was official. Ava stared at it for a moment. In the photos from the reception she'd seen on other people's phones, Celine had looked luminous. White dress, pearled buttons, hair pinned up by a stylist who'd charged more than Ava's monthly rent. Standing next to their father, who was beaming, who had his arm around Celine's waist and looked at her with the particular warmth he'd been saving his entire life for a child who had earned it. Ava had made the cake. 10 feet. 342 individual sugar flowers, each one hand-pressed, because Celine had seen a photo in a magazine and said she wanted that. 2 weeks of 16-hour days. Ava's hands were still calloused from the molds. She'd used $1,400 of her own money on imported Belgian chocolate and Madagascar vanilla and edible gold leaf, because the family had said they'd handle the budget and then quietly hadn't, and she hadn't pushed back because pushing back with the Morettis was a different kind of pain than the one she was currently in. The cake had been the most beautiful thing she'd ever made. Her mother had looked at it for perhaps 4 seconds before moving on to discuss the floral arrangements. She kept scrolling. There was no one to call. That wasn't self-pity. It was geography. Her 2 closest friends, Mara and Dex, both of whom worked with her at Nocturne, were currently at a catering event in Jersey City and had their phones on silent. Her neighbor, an elderly woman named Pearl, who sometimes brought her soup, went to bed at 9. She had a cousin in Connecticut, but they hadn't spoken in 2 years after a Thanksgiving incident that still hurt to think about. And then she reached the name. She didn't know why it was still in her phone. She'd thought about deleting it 100 times. Told herself she would. Put it off the way you put off throwing out something that still carries some residue of a person. A smell, a memory, an argument about whether the thing was worth keeping. Lucien Val. No photo. She'd deleted the photo, but she remembered it anyway. Him in a gray coat outside a restaurant in the rain, not unlike this rain 3 years ago, looking at her with that particular expression he had that she'd never fully decoded. The one that looked like anger but wasn't. That looked like warning but also wasn't quite that. The last thing he'd ever said to her. Standing in the parking lot of her old apartment building after she'd told him she couldn't do whatever it was they were doing anymore, that she needed to stop before she couldn't, that his world and her world were built on different foundations, and she didn't trust what would happen if she stayed close enough to feel the difference. He'd been quiet for a long time, long enough that she'd started to think he was going to simply walk away without a word, which would have been devastating and also completely within his range of behavior. Then he'd said, low enough that she'd almost missed it over the sound of traffic, "If you ever need me, call once. I'll come." She'd said something stupid like, "You don't have to do that." He'd looked at her with those dark eyes that didn't give anything away and said, "I know I don't." And then he'd gotten in his car and driven away, and that was the last time she'd seen Lucien Vale in person. 3 years ago. She pressed the green button. It rang once, picked up. Silence. Not dead silence. She could hear road noise, could hear the specific quality of air inside a moving vehicle, could hear someone, him, breathing. "It's Ava," she said, which was stupid because of course he knew. He would have seen the name, but her brain wasn't operating at full capacity right now. "I know." His voice had the same register she remembered, low and even and unhurried. "Who hurt you?" She hadn't said anything about being hurt. The observation knocked something loose in her chest. That he could hear it in 2 words, that her voice carried what she was trying to hold back. And suddenly, she was crying in a way she hadn't let herself cry yet. Ugly crying. The kind without dignity, her ribs screaming every time she inhaled. "There were men outside the hotel," she said. I fell. I'm in the 14th Street station, by the maintenance gate on the south end. My phone is about to die, and I can hear them looking for me, and I don't—" She stopped, made herself stop. "I didn't know who else to call." A pause, then, "Don't move. Lucien, don't move." The line went dead. Ava stared at her phone. 1% battery. She lowered it and pressed her back against the concrete and listened to the sound of drunk men getting closer and tried to calculate how long it took to drive from wherever Lucien Vale was to wherever she was. Too long, probably. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Then the emergency lights went out entirely. Not a flicker. Not a malfunction. They simply stopped. The platform above her went dark, and then the maintenance corridor went dark, and then the only light was the faint orange glow of the train indicator board at the far end of the platform, 60 feet away, displaying numbers that didn't mean anything to her right now. "Hey!" One of the men from above, annoyed, uncertain now. "The hell? It's just the lights." "The lights don't just go out in subway stations, Marcus." "Well, apparently they do." She heard footsteps come down the last set of stairs, slow. Someone who'd had too much scotch navigating unfamiliar terrain in the dark. She pressed herself harder into the concrete and held her breath and felt her ribs light up with a specific, detailed pain that she decided to process later. "I know you're down here," the first voice said. Not to his friends, to her. His tone had changed. The annoyance was still there, but underneath it was something worse, something that had decided. "You made a mistake running. That little scene outside the hotel? My father is going to be on the phone with your family's lawyers by morning." She kept very still. "Your family already knows you're an embarrassment." Getting closer. She could hear his breathing now, uneven from alcohol and exertion. "Your own father announced tonight you're getting cut off. You're homeless, and you don't even know it yet." Her jaw tightened. He wasn't wrong about the announcement. That had been real. Her father at the podium during the reception, champagne flute in hand, announcing to 400 people that the family would be consolidating assets ahead of Celine's new household, which meant some difficult but necessary decisions, which meant Ava's apartment, the apartment she paid rent on, the apartment that happened to be in a building her father owned, was being sold, effective immediately, giving her 90 days to find alternative accommodations. 400 people. Champagne. Polite applause. She'd stood there in her silver dress with her calloused hands and her 10-foot cake and absorbed it the way she'd absorbed everything the Morettis had ever done to her, by going very still, by turning her face into something neutral, by performing okayness at a level that should have qualified as professional theater. She'd managed it for about 4 minutes. Then she'd walked very calmly out of the ballroom, through the lobby, out the hotel's service entrance, and onto the sidewalk, where the rain had immediately destroyed whatever was left of her composure, and several drunk men had decided her exit from a fancy event in a torn dress was an opportunity. The footsteps stopped about 8 feet from her position. "I can hear you breathing," the man said, and then a different sound. Not footsteps. Something else. The sound of multiple people moving with a coordination that had nothing to do with drunk entitlement. Efficient, practiced, coming from the stairs at both ends of the platform simultaneously. The man near her went quiet. "Who's—" He didn't finish the sentence. What Ava heard instead was a very short, very decisive series of sounds that she couldn't fully interpret in the dark. Something hitting something, something else being moved, a voice saying one word quietly, that she couldn't make out. Then heels on concrete, coming toward her. Measured steps. She'd heard those steps before. A flashlight beam cut through the dark and found her face. She flinched. The beam dropped immediately, re-angled to illuminate the floor. Behind the light, a silhouette. Tall, wide-shouldered, moving like someone who'd decided what he was going to do 3 decisions ago, and everything since had just been execution. Lucian Vale crouched in front of her. He was in a suit, black jacket, no tie, collar open at the throat. There was something dark on the cuff of his left sleeve that she registered and then didn't look at again. His face, in the reflected light, was exactly what she remembered, sharp-edged, controlled, with that particular quality of stillness that wasn't peace, but was something adjacent to it. The stillness of a person who had decided long ago that visible emotion was a currency he couldn't afford. Except his hands. His hands when he touched her face. 2 fingers, the lightest possible contact, turning her chin to look at her lip, her eye, the bruising along her cheekbone. His hands weren't entirely steady. She noticed. She didn't say anything about it. "Your rib," he said. Not a question. "Left side. I hit the railing." He made a sound that wasn't words. His jaw moved. "The men," she started, "have been handled." "Lucienne, I don't want—" "They're not going to bother you again," he said. His voice stayed flat. She knew better than to push it right now. "Can you stand?" She tried. Her ribs sent a detailed objection, and she made a sound she hadn't intended to make. And then his arm was around her, careful in a way that cost him something. She could feel it, the effort of careful, the deliberate modulation of someone who wanted to do something differently. He got her upright. She leaned on him more than she wanted to. He removed his jacket without releasing her and put it around her shoulders. It smelled like him, cedar and something darker that she'd spent 3 years trying not to remember. "I have a car outside," he said. "I can't go—" She stopped. Go where? Her apartment that was being sold? Celine's wedding reception back to her family who'd just publicly discarded her? "I don't have anywhere." Lucien looked at her for a long moment in the dark. "Yes, you do," he said. They came up the subway stairs into the rain. Ava registered distantly that there were other people. His men, 4 of them that she counted, though she suspected there were more, moving with the same practiced efficiency around the perimeter, the kind of presence that made other people find reasons to be elsewhere. No one on the street near the station entrance. An armored black SUV at the curb with its engine running, another one behind it. Then the flashes started. Someone had a camera. Then 2. Then she saw the media van half a block up, a woman in a raincoat holding a mic in front of a camera operator who was very definitely filming. "Don't look at them," Lucian said, his hand moving to the back of her head, turning her face away. How did they... They follow the cars. Don't look. She kept her face down and let him guide her into the back of the SUV. And then he was beside her, and the door closed, and the car was moving, and the rain hammered the windows, and she sat in the heated leather seat in his jacket and tried to figure out how her sister's wedding had ended here. You came fast, she said. Her voice sounded strange, thin. I wasn't far. She looked at him. Where were you? A beat. Handling something. Something you left to come get me. He turned from the window and looked at her. That look. The one she'd never fully decoded. Yes. She didn't know what to do with that, so she looked out the window instead. Manhattan sliding past in the rain, all lit windows and wet asphalt. The city doing what it always did, moving, indifferent, enormous, requiring nothing from her and offering nothing back. My family is going to say things, she said. When they find out I called you, they're going to say I'm using you, that I'm making things worse. She paused. My mother is going to say I'm doing this for attention. I know what your family says, Lucian said. I'm just... She stopped. Her ribs made a decision, and she held still until the wave passed. I'm telling you what's coming. Ava. She looked at him. I know what's coming, he said. I've been watching your family for 7 months. She stared at him. He held her gaze without apology. What does that mean? She said. The car moved through a red light without slowing. Outside, the city continued its indifferent sliding. Lucien turned back to the window, and his jaw was doing the thing again. The thing where a decision was being weighed, where something that had been contained was pressuring its container. It means, he said, that tonight isn't as simple as what happened outside that hotel. Ava's stomach turned over. Lucien. Her voice had gone very level. She recognized it. The voice she used when she was frightened and needed not to appear it. What did you find out about my family? He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that the car crossed 10th Avenue, then 9th. Long enough that the rain started to ease. Then he said, I need you to understand something before I tell you this. Tell me. What I'm about to tell you is going to change everything, he said. You won't be able to unknow it. And once you know it, some of what I've been doing will make more sense, and some of it will probably make you angry. I'm already angry, she said. Tell me. He looked at her. And Ava Moretti, sitting in the back of an armored car in her ruined dress with her bruised face and her borrowed jacket, felt the specific chill of realizing that the worst thing that had happened to her tonight wasn't the men in the subway. It was whatever Lucien already knew and hadn't told her yet. The car stopped at a red light, and Ava watched a woman on the sidewalk struggle with an umbrella that the wind had already destroyed, the spines bent backward, the canopy inside out, and the woman was just standing there holding the ruined thing like she hadn't decided yet whether to keep fighting it or let it go. Ava understood that particular paralysis. 7 months, she said. Lucien didn't answer immediately. He had a way of managing silence that she'd always found maddening. Not the silence of someone who didn't know what to say, but the silence of someone who was deciding how much of what they knew to release, and in what order, and with what framing. It was the silence of a man who had spent his life in rooms where information was the only real currency and had learned to spend it carefully. Your father has a foundation, he said finally. The Moretti Civic Trust. You know it. Of course I know it. The Civic Trust was one of her family's primary social instruments. Gala dinners, political fundraisers, arts patronage. Her mother's name was on the letterhead. There were photographs of the family at trust events going back to when Ava was 6 years old. They've had it for 20 years. 22. He turned from the window. For the first 14, it was legitimate, underfunded, mostly ceremonial, but clean. A pause. 8 years ago, something changed. She waited. Your father made a decision, Lucien said. I don't know if it was desperation or greed, probably both. He started accepting money from people who needed somewhere for it to go. What kind of people? The kind who don't give interviews. The car crossed an intersection, and the city lights moved across his face in strips. Light, dark, light. His expression didn't change, but she could see something working behind his eyes. The calculation of a man who'd been holding this information for a long time and was now choosing each word the way you'd choose a step in a minefield. They moved the money through the trust's event accounts, he continued. Ticket sales, donation processing, vendor payments, standard laundering architecture. Messy enough to look like nonprofit accounting, clean enough to survive a casual audit. He stopped. For a while. For a while, she repeated. The problem with using a social foundation as a vehicle is that social foundations have a lot of moving parts, a lot of accounts, a lot of signatories. He looked at her now with an expression that she'd never seen on him before. Or maybe she had, and had simply refused to name it. 8 years ago, when this started, you were 19. The air in the car changed, or maybe it was just her chest tightening around her damaged ribs. No, she said. You had a small business account. You'd just registered Nocturne as an LLC. You were starting to formalize. I was 19 and I had $400 and a commercial kitchen rental agreement, she said. Her voice came out flat. I didn't have a business. I had a name and an idea. You had an LLC with a registered bank account, Lucian said, and your father had access to it because you were 19 and didn't know to prevent it, and for approximately 14 months, money moved through that account. The rain against the windows, the engine, her own breathing, which had gone shallow and careful around the ribs. How much money? She said. Enough that if federal investigators find the thread and pull it, your name is on the account. She looked at him. You're telling me my father used my business account to launder money when I was 19 years old without telling me? Yes. And that if this comes apart, you're the most convenient fall position, he said. Your name is on the account. You were a legal adult. The trust structure puts distance between your father and the actual transactions. He didn't look away. It's a clean setup. If someone needed to sacrifice a member of the family, you'd be the obvious choice. She thought about her father at the podium tonight, the champagne, the smooth, practiced delivery of the announcement about selling her apartment, the language about consolidating assets, the polite framing that turned her eviction into financial strategy. 90 days. She'd thought it was cruelty. She'd thought it was his particular brand of dismissal, the kind that required an audience, that needed to be performed in front of people so it carried social weight as well as practical weight. Now she was revising. He's been setting this up, she said slowly, moving me out before whatever's coming, Lucien said. Yes, I think so. She sat with that for a moment, her father's face at the podium, the way he'd looked. Not cruel exactly, more like someone completing a task, tying off a loose end with an expression of mild administrative satisfaction. She was a loose end. She had been a loose end for a very long time and had mistaken it for something else. What's coming? She said. Not a question. She knew the answer was in the next part of what he hadn't told her yet. I don't know exactly, Lucien said. But 3 weeks ago, 2 men from the Federal Financial Crimes Unit started asking questions in the neighborhoods where the trust does business. I have people who notice that kind of thing. His hands were in his lap now, still, too still. When I heard, I started moving faster. Faster on what? He looked at her. On making sure, he said, that when this collapses, and it will collapse, you have distance from it. The weight of that landed on her slowly, in stages, the way damage from a fall sometimes didn't register until you stopped moving. You've been protecting me, she said, for 7 months, while I didn't know any of this. Yes. Without telling me. A beat. Yes. She looked out the window. They were on the West Side Highway now, moving north, the Hudson, a dark expanse on her left with the lights of the Jersey Shore beyond it. She watched the water and breathed through her nose and tried to locate the feeling that was building in her chest, because it wasn't a single feeling. It was several, stacked on top of each other in a way that was hard to sort. Gratitude, fury, fear, and something underneath all of that which was older and more corrosive, and which she recognized as the specific emotion that came from learning that the people around her had known things about her life that she hadn't known about herself. She'd spent her entire life with people making decisions about her without her. She'd thought Lucien was different. "You should have told me," she said. "I know. That's not good enough." She turned from the window. Her ribs objected, and she ignored them. "You've known for 7 months that my family was using me as a legal shield. 7 months that I was potentially in the path of a federal investigation. And you decided on your own, without asking me, that I didn't need to know that about my own life. I didn't want you to run. That wasn't your choice to make." "No," he said. "It wasn't." She waited for more. He didn't offer more. The acknowledgement sat there between them, plain and insufficient, the way honest admissions often were, true, and also nowhere near enough. "I'm not going to pretend," he said after a moment, "that I made that decision entirely for your benefit. Some of it was, I needed you where I could see you. While I was pulling records, while I was building the picture of what your family had done, I needed to know you weren't going to disappear into some part of the city where I couldn't reach you." "So it was about control," she said. "It was about—" He stopped, started again. "It was about the fact that I have spent 3 years watching from a distance, and that is the worst thing I have ever done. And when I finally had a reason to be close enough to do something useful, I was not going to give it up." His voice stayed level through all of it, but there was something underneath the level, a pressure, an old pressure, that she could hear. "That's not a justification. That's what's true." The car moved. Manhattan's skyline fell behind them, replaced by the darker, lower profile of upper Manhattan neighborhoods, quieter streets, a different kind of city. "Where are we going?" she said. "Somewhere safe." "I need you to tell me where, Lucien. I'm not doing the thing where I just go along. My building on Riverside," he said. "The penthouse. It has security, and it has a view, and it has a door that locks, and nobody gets through without my say." He looked at her. "You can leave whenever you want. I'm not holding you. But tonight, with your ribs and your phone dead, and paparazzi who already have photos of your face, tonight, I'm asking you to let me take you somewhere that isn't a problem." She thought about the bakery, Nocturne, in its converted ground floor space in Cobble Hill, with the back office she'd been sleeping in since her budget had gotten tight. The cot she'd put there 3 months ago, telling herself it was temporary. The way the radiator knocked at 4 in the morning. The way she'd started keeping her good knives locked up because she didn't entirely trust the neighborhood kids who sometimes came in through the delivery door. "Okay," she said. The building on Riverside Drive was not what she'd expected, and she'd spent enough time adjacent to Lucien's world to have recalibrated her expectations significantly. It wasn't flashy. It was old, genuinely old, pre-war construction with the kind of limestone facade that required ongoing maintenance and quiet money. The lobby had original tile floors and a doorman who nodded at Lucien without a word and looked at Ava's condition without any visible reaction at all. The elevator had brass fittings. The penthouse had floor-to-ceiling windows along the entire west face, looking out over the river, the bridge, the dark bulk of the Palisades on the far shore. It was 11 floors above everything, and the rain had finally stopped, and the city below was washed and glittering in the way it sometimes was after a storm. Briefly clean, briefly honest. "Sit," Lucien said. "I'm fine." "You're not. Sit." She sat on a low couch because her ribs had decided to restate their objection, and arguing with him was taking more energy than she currently had. She heard him moving in another room, water running, drawers opening. He came back with a first aid kit, a glass of water, 2 ibuprofen, and a bag of ice wrapped in a dish towel. He sat across from her and opened the kit, and she thought about resisting and looked at his face and decided it wasn't worth it. "The lip's not bad," he said, examining it. "It'll be swollen tomorrow." He turned her chin to look at the cheekbone. His fingers were very careful, almost reluctant. "No hematoma. You're going to bruise." "I know." She watched him work. His face in close proximity was familiar and strange at the same time. She'd spent 3 years filing it into memory, and now the original was here, and the memory's version had been inadequate, in some ways she couldn't fully articulate. There were lines around his eyes she didn't remember. His hair was a little longer. He needed to sleep. She could see it. "How long have you been up?" "What?" "Tonight. What were you doing when I called?" He didn't answer immediately. He pressed the wrapped ice gently against her cheekbone, and her free hand came up instinctively to hold it, and her fingers ended up over his, and neither of them moved for a moment. "I was meeting with someone," he said. "About my family?" "Indirectly." He sat back, let her hold the ice herself. "There are people involved in what the Morettis have been doing who are not part of your family. People with connections that make the cleanup more complicated." "What kind of cleanup?" He looked at her. "You said make the cleanup more complicated. What are you cleaning up, Lucy Ann?" "I'm making sure," he said carefully, "that the evidence that surfaces points in the right direction and doesn't take you with it. And those people, the ones involved, are being managed." She heard the word the way he meant it, not bureaucratically. She'd heard him use that particular flatness before, in moments where the specific meaning of a word was less important than the weight behind it. The implication that managed covered a variety of actions, and she didn't need to know the full taxonomy. 3 years ago, that kind of answer would have been enough for her to leave the room. She was still in the room. She didn't know exactly what that said about her. She suspected it said several things. "My father knows you," she said. "Doesn't he? He knows who you are. Not just the hotels and the nightclubs." "Yes." "Then why?" She stopped. The question was forming, and it was an ugly question, and she wanted to make sure she had it right before she asked it. "When you started coming to Nocturne, when you became a regular, did you know then? About the account? About what he'd done?" Lucien was very still. "I had suspicions," he said. "And you came to my bakery?" "Yes." "Because of my father." The word hung in the air between them. Not a question this time. He looked at her the way a person looks when they've been waiting for a particular door to open, and it finally has, and they're not sure they want to walk through it anymore. "Initially," he said. Her jaw tightened. "Initially," she said back. "Ava, don't." She set the ice down, carefully, because her hands wanted to do something else with it, and she was not going to throw anything in this man's apartment while she was wearing his jacket and sitting on his couch with bruised ribs. "Don't tell me it changed. Don't tell me you came in to get information on my father and then you met me and it became something different, because I know that's what you're about to say, and I need about 60 seconds before I hear it." He said nothing. She took the 60 seconds. She looked out at the river. A barge was moving south, running lights reflected in the black water, slow and deliberate, and indifferent to everything happening on shore. "Did you find what you came for?" she said. "Initially." "No." His voice was quiet. "You never talked about your family at work. I noticed that. I started coming back because you were—" He stopped. "You were the only thing in that space that wasn't performing. Everyone else in that bakery was doing something. You were just working." She didn't say anything. "I stayed," he said, "because I wanted to. That's the truth. And I know it doesn't fix the start of it." She looked at the ice on the cushion beside her. The towel was damp now, the ice doing what ice did, shrinking, spending itself, becoming something less useful than it started as. Her phone was dead. Her apartment was being sold. Her face was going to look considerably worse by morning, and the man sitting across from her had come into her life as surveillance and stayed as something she'd spent 3 years trying to name and failing. She was so tired. The tiredness was different from the physical kind. This was the specific exhaustion of a woman who had held her own weight for so long that the muscles required for it had simply given out, all at once, in the back of a car in the rain. "I need to sleep," she said. "There's a room." "I know." She stood. Her ribs sent their note. She ignored it. "We're not done with this conversation." "I know that too." She stopped at the doorway, didn't turn around. "The men at the station," she said. "What did your people do to them?" Silence. "Lucien." "They won't be filing any reports," he said. She stood there for a moment with that answer. Then she walked to the room and closed the door. She lay on top of the covers in the dark, with his jacket still around her shoulders, and stared at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of the apartment. The river wind against the glass, a door closing softly somewhere, the building settling the way old buildings did, as if they were breathing. She thought about her father's face at the podium. She thought about Lucien's hands shaking slightly when he touched her bruised face. She thought about 14 months of transactions moving through a bank account with her name on it, when she was 19 and didn't know to lock the door, while her family had smiled at her across dinner tables and called her soft. She was almost asleep when her own thought pulled her back. 14 months. She sat up in the dark. The Civic Trust laundering had moved through her account for 14 months. Lucien had said 8 years ago, which meant it had stopped. Which meant there was a reason it had stopped. Either the risk profile changed, or a cleaner vehicle had been found, or someone had decided the account was no longer useful. 14 months, and then nothing. She was 20 and a half when it stopped. She tried to remember what had changed at 20 and a half. Whether there'd been a moment, a conversation, some shift in the family dynamic she'd registered but not understood at the time. And then she remembered. Her hands went cold. 20 and a half was when she'd told her parents she was serious about Nocturne. When she'd shown her father the business plan, actual projections, sourced equipment lists, a potential lease space in Cobble Hill. When she'd asked if the family would co-sign the lease because she didn't have credit history, her father had said no, flatly, without discussion. No. And she'd understood it as another version of what her father always communicated to her. That he didn't believe in her, that her ambitions were a soft woman's soft fantasies, that she would fail and he didn't want his name on the paperwork. But what if it wasn't that? What if he'd looked at her business plan and seen the liability she was about to create for herself? The paper trail, the auditors, the formal accounts, and realized that keeping her account as a vehicle was about to become dangerous. What if the no had been protection, not of her, of himself? She sat in the dark in a stranger's bed in her ruined dress and felt something she didn't have a clean word for. It lived somewhere between horror and a terrible, clarifying calm. The kind of calm that came not from peace, but from finally understanding the dimensions of a room you'd been trapped in for years. They had never been thoughtless. That was the thing. The Morettis had never been carelessly cruel. They'd been deliberately, architecturally, precisely cruel, building a structure in which Ava was simultaneously indispensable and disposable, visible enough to serve a function and invisible enough to absorb consequences. She'd spent years trying to earn their love. She'd actually been earning their insurance policy. The door to her room opened. Not a creak. A deliberate push, slow, with a knock that came a half-second too late. She was already sitting up, already oriented toward the sound. Lucien stood in the doorway, still in his shirt. The jacket was gone. He was holding something. Her phone, she realized, connected to a cable. Charging. "I thought you'd want it when you woke up," he said. She looked at him. "Lucien?" Her voice in the dark. "The account. When did it stop?" "Exactly." A beat. "March," he said. 8 years ago. March through May of the following year." She did the math. Her jaw tightened. "My father told me no in April," she said, when I showed him the Nocturne business plan. She watched him understand it. The understanding moved across his face without dramatics. Just a slight compression around the eyes. A stillness that was different from his usual stillness. The stillness of a person absorbing something they'd suspected but hadn't confirmed. "He pulled the money out," she said, "because I was about to start building a legitimate paper trail and he couldn't afford the exposure." "Yes," Lucien said, "that's what I think." "He told me he didn't believe in me." "I know." And I believed him. The words came out like something being pulled from a wound. I spent 8 years believing he thought I was going to fail, trying to prove him wrong, working 16-hour days, building Nocturne into something real, telling myself that someday he'd have to see it. She stopped. He never thought I was going to fail. He was afraid I was going to succeed loudly enough to bring auditors to my door. Lucien said nothing. There was nothing to say. She looked at the phone in his hand. 3% battery. She thought about who she could call, who was in her contact list that she actually trusted, who in her life had been entirely, unambiguously on her side with no ulterior architecture beneath it. The list was shorter than she wanted it to be. "Tomorrow," she said, "I want to see everything you have, the records, the account history, whatever your people pulled, all of it." "Ava, I'm not asking," she said. "You've been managing my life for 7 months and telling yourself it was protection. If you want to keep telling yourself that, Start by giving me the information and letting me decide what to do with it." He was quiet for a long moment. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she confirmed. He set the phone on the dresser, still plugged in, and started to pull the door closed. "Lucienne." She didn't know why she said it. It came out before she'd decided to say it. He stopped. "The first time you came into Nocturne," she said. "What did you order?" A long beat. "A croissant," he said. "You'd run out of the pain au chocolat." She looked at him in the dark. "You ate the whole thing," she said. "It was good." "I know it was," she said. "Go to sleep." He pulled the door closed. She lay back down in the dark and held the ruined end of the night against her chest, like something she hadn't decided yet whether to keep. Outside, Manhattan glittered its indifferent glitter. And in a house in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a room with a mahogany desk and the kind of silence that only serious money could buy, Robert Moretti answered a phone call from a number he'd been dreading for 3 weeks, listened to 4 sentences, and said very quietly, Find out where she is." Robert Moretti ended the call and set the phone face down on the mahogany desk and sat very still for approximately 30 seconds, which was how long it took him to move from reaction to calculation. He was a man who'd built his entire life on the interval between those two things, the gap between feeling something and deciding what to do about it. Most people never found that gap. Robert had lived in it for 40 years. He opened the desk drawer and removed a second phone. Prepaid. The kind that didn't exist on any family plan, any billing statement, any record that his wife might accidentally encounter. He dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "We have a problem," he said. On the other end, a voice that was carefully unremarkable, the voice of a man who had spent decades ensuring he was never the most memorable person in any room, said, "How large?" "She called Vale tonight." Silence. "How much does he know?" the voice said. "I don't know yet." "Then find out," the voice said, "before I have to." The line went dead. Robert Moretti sat in the dark of his study for a long time after that, looking at nothing in particular, doing the math on a calculation that had always had a clean answer and was now starting to show remainders he hadn't planned for. His younger daughter had always been the soft one. He'd staked a great deal on that remaining true. Ava woke at 6:14 in the morning to a phone at 11% and 4 missed calls. 3 from a number she didn't recognize, 1 from Celine. She lay still for a moment and cataloged her body's various complaints in order of urgency. Ribs, which had stiffened overnight into a solid wall of objection along her left side. Lip, swollen enough that she could feel it with her tongue. Cheekbone, tender in a way that suggested the bruise had done its overnight work. The silver dress was a ruin she'd slept in. Mascara had transferred to the pillow in abstract shapes. She called Celine back. It rang once. "Where are you?" Not a question. Celine's voice at 6 in the morning had the particular quality of someone who had been awake for hours managing a situation. Crisp, slightly too controlled, with the specific register of a woman who had married into one of New York's oldest families the previous evening, and was now dealing with the fact that her sister had apparently left the reception to be photographed outside a subway station with Lucian Vale. "I'm safe," Ava said. "That's not what I asked. It's the only answer I have right now." A pause. She could hear background sounds on Celine's end. Hotel sounds, a door closing, the soft, indeterminate noise of an expensive room in a pre-dawn hour. Presumably, Celine was in the Ashcroft Grand's honeymoon suite, which meant this phone call was happening 6 hours into her wedding night, and that told Ava something about the relative priority of situations. "There are photos everywhere," Celine said, "of you and Vale outside the 14th Street station. You look like... Ava, your face... I fell." "You didn't fall." "I fell," Ava said again, more flatly. Another pause. Different quality this time, softer around the edges in a way that Celine's pauses almost never were. "Are you hurt?" Celine said. "Yes." "Badly?" "No." The silence that followed was the kind they'd been having their entire lives. The silence of 2 women who had grown up in the same house and learned entirely different survival strategies for it, and then spent 20 years wondering if those strategies had cost them something with each other that they couldn't fully recover. Dad called me this morning, Celine said. At 5. What did he say? He wants to know where you are. He said it's important. He said... She stopped. He said there are legal complications and he needs to talk to you directly before... Before what? He didn't finish the sentence. Ava sat up. Her ribs announced themselves. She pushed her feet to the floor and looked out the window at the river, gray and wide in the early morning light, moving the way it always moved. Indifferent, constant, going south regardless. Celine, she said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Ava, did you know about the civic trust? The silence this time was different from all the previous silences. It had a shape. Ava felt it the way you felt the shape of a room in the dark. Not by seeing it, but by what it pushed back. What about the trust? Celine said carefully. Did you know what Dad was using it for? I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Her voice came out flat and certain, and she was surprised by it. The certainty of it, the absence of the usual apologetic softening she applied to accusations. You know exactly what I mean. Did you know? The pause went on long enough that Ava could hear Celine breathing. I knew things weren't entirely... Celine stopped, started again. I knew Dad had made some arrangements that were... Celine. I didn't know about your account, Celine said, fast. I swear I didn't know about your account specifically. The window. The river. Ava's hand on the phone tightening until her knuckles felt the pressure. But you knew about the rest, she said. Nothing. How long? Ava said. Ava, please. How long did you know? 3 years, Celine said, very quietly. I found out 3 years ago. 3 years. Ava did not say anything for a long moment. 3 years ago was when she'd ended things with Lucien. 3 years ago was when she'd made her decision about his world and her world and the distance between them. She'd done it partly because she'd been afraid of what it meant to be close to a man whose life operated in the spaces where consequences didn't apply to everyone equally. She'd told herself she was making the clean choice, the honest choice. She had chosen her family's world over his. Her family's world, it turned out, had been operating in those same spaces the entire time. They just had better clothes and a letterhead. You got married last night, Ava said, with this knowledge. Henry doesn't know anything. I'm not talking about Henry, I'm talking about you. You stood up there last night in front of 400 people and smiled, and you've known for 3 years that our father was using me as... She stopped herself. Did you tell him? When you found out about the trust, did you tell Dad that you knew? A pause. He asked me not to say anything. He asked you. He said he was handling it. He said it was almost done, that the exposure was minimal, that there was a plan. Was I the plan, Celine? Silence. Was I the plan? I don't know. Her sister's voice had gone thin. I don't know what he was planning to do about your account. I told myself there was nothing linking you to it directly, that you were 19, that no one could seriously... Stop. Ava closed her eyes. Stop explaining what you told yourself. She ended the call. She sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in her lap and looked at the floor and did not cry. There was something past crying happening in her chest, something with less water and more stone, heavy and clarifying and without the relief that crying sometimes brought. She'd had 2 people in her life she'd called family. One had built a legal trap around her. One had known about it for 3 years and said nothing. She stood up, set the phone on the dresser, and opened the bedroom door. The apartment was quiet in the particular way of early morning, all low gray light and the smell of coffee from somewhere. She followed the smell to the kitchen, where Lucien stood at the counter with his back to her, still in yesterday's shirt, sleeves pushed to the elbow. He turned when he heard her and looked at her face. Not the bruising, though his eyes went there briefly, but her expression. And whatever he saw made him set down the cup without drinking from it. Celine knew, Ava said. 3 years. She's known for 3 years. He didn't look surprised. You knew that too, she said. I suspected. How many things have you suspected that you haven't told me? He held her gaze. This was the last one. She crossed her arms over her chest, carefully, because of the ribs, and looked at him and felt the full weight of the morning and the night before it, and the 3 years before that, and the 8 years before that. All of it stacked up like a structure she'd been living inside without ever seeing the blueprint. "I want to see the records," she said. "Everything, now." He nodded once. The documents were in a secure folder on a tablet that one of his men brought up from somewhere in the building within 15 minutes. Ava sat at the kitchen table in the morning light and went through them with the methodical attention she applied to costing spreadsheets and recipe ratios, line by line, date by date, account number by account number. It was worse than she'd expected, not because the amounts were larger, though they were larger than Lucian had implied, worse because of the precision. The transactions had been structured with enormous care, amounts that stayed below reporting thresholds, timing that corresponded to legitimate trust events, descriptions that matched real vendor relationships. Someone had spent real time on this, someone who knew financial architecture, or someone who had paid someone who did. "There's a name that shows up in the authorization chain," she said. "Voss Meridian Consulting. What is that?" Lucian set down his cup. "A firm," he said, "nominally based in Delaware. The principals are—" He stopped. She looked up. His jaw was doing the thing. "Tell me," she said. "The primary consultant on the trust account," he said. "The person who designed the transaction structure and managed the account routing. Who?" "His name is Daniel Ferris," Lucien said. "He's a financial architect who's worked for 4 or 5 families like yours over the past decade. He's good enough that nobody's ever built a clean case against him." He paused. "He's also Henry Ashworth's brother-in-law." The kitchen was very quiet. Henry Ashworth, who had married Celine Moretti 12 hours ago in a cathedral, while 400 people watched and Ava stood in the back in silver and silver flowers she'd pressed by hand. Henry Ashworth, whose family was old money and political connections, and the kind of social armor the Morettis had been trying to acquire for 20 years. "The wedding," Ava said slowly. Lucien waited. "The wedding wasn't—" She put both hands flat on the table. "Tell me the wedding wasn't part of this." He didn't answer fast enough. "Lucien." Her voice had dropped to something she barely recognized. "Tell me my sister didn't marry into this deliberately." "I can't tell you that," he said. "I don't know the degree to which Celine understood the full structure. She may have been—" "Don't!" The word came out hard. "Don't tell me she might have been a victim too. I need you to tell me what you know, not what might make this easier for me to hear." He was quiet for a moment. "What I know," he said, "is that Voss Meridian has been billing the trust for consulting services for 6 years. What I know is that the Ashworth connection to Voss Meridian predates Celine's relationship with Henry by approximately 2 years. What I know is that when your father was looking for a new vehicle for the transactions, after he closed your account, he moved everything into a structure that Voss Meridian controlled directly. And what I know is that the Ashworth family's political connections have provided the trust with the kind of cover that made the federal investigator's job significantly harder." She stared at him. "The marriage," she said. "The wedding. All of tonight was a transaction," he said quietly. "Yes, that's what I believe." She looked down at the tablet, at the columns of numbers, at the dates and amounts and account designations that represented 8 years of her family, moving dirty money through structures she'd never been allowed to see. Her sister's wedding cake, 342 sugar flowers, 2 weeks of her hands, her money, done in the service of a transaction. Something cracked in her chest that wasn't her ribs. She stood up from the table fast enough that the chair scraped back and she had to catch it before it fell, and that small, stupid moment of catching the chair, the ordinary reflex of catching a chair before it made noise, was somehow the thing that broke the surface. She stood there gripping the back of the chair with both hands and breathed through her nose and felt the rage come up like water through a floor drain, unstoppable, finding every crack. "They were never ashamed of me," she said. The words felt strange in her mouth, like she was identifying something she'd been trying to name for so long that the name itself felt foreign. "All those years, every dinner, every comment about my weight, my career, my choices, it was never about shame. It was about keeping me small enough that I wouldn't look at what they were doing, keeping me busy trying to earn their approval so I'd never ask the right questions. She pressed harder on the chair back. They needed me grateful and desperate and just close enough to be useful. Lucien didn't say anything. She looked up at him. My father's going to call me today. He called Celine at 5 in the morning to find out where I am. He wants to talk before... She stopped. The sentence Robert Moretti hadn't finished on the phone with Celine. Before something. Before what? Lucien's expression shifted in a way she'd never seen it shift before. Carefully. The way someone moved who was carrying something fragile and had just hit an unexpected step. The federal investigators, he said, the ones I told you about who started asking questions 3 weeks ago. He paused. I found out last night, the meeting I left to come get you. They moved faster than I expected. There's a subpoena. It went out yesterday. The room went quiet. For the trust accounts, she said. For all accounts associated with the trust's operational history. He held her gaze. Including accounts that were used as transit vehicles in the 8 years prior. Her hands on the chair back, her name on an account, her father calling at 5 in the morning. He wants to talk to me, she said, before I find out about the subpoena from someone else, before I get a call from a federal investigator, before I have a lawyer who isn't his lawyer. She let go of the chair. He wants to get to me first. Yes, Lucien said. That's what I believe. Because if he gets to me first, he controls your response. He controls what you say, who you say it to, how the account is explained. Lucien's voice stayed level, but she could hear the thing underneath it now. The pressure that had been building since last night, since before that, since 7 months of watching something approach from a distance and being unable to stop the momentum of it. He needs you cooperative, or he needs you discredited, one or the other. She looked at him. If I don't cooperate, she said, what does discrediting me look like? Lucien reached across the table and turned the tablet to face her. He'd pulled up a new document while she was standing, not account records, something else, a page from what looked like a gossip publication's website, time-stamped 40 minutes ago, already live. The headline read, Moretti family speaks out on troubled daughter. Concern after wild night with known crime figure. The article had quotes, anonymous family sources, words like erratic and history of instability, and we've tried to help her for years. There was a photo. Her and Lucien outside the subway station, his arm around her face bruised, and her dress destroyed. The caption underneath it read, Ava Moretti, with alleged organized crime associate Lucien Vale, following what sources describe as a breakdown at her sister's wedding. She read it twice. The article had been published at 5:47 in the morning, 20 minutes after her father had called Celine. She set the tablet down very carefully. He didn't wait to see if I'd cooperate, she said. He already started. Yes. He's already decided what I am. She could hear her own voice from a strange distance. The troubled daughter, the one who made a scene, the one who ran off with a dangerous man and had to be managed. She looked at Lucien. He's been preparing this version of me in case he ever needed it. The article went up before most people are awake, Lucien said. By 8 o'clock it'll be everywhere. By 9, his lawyers will be calling anyone who might take your account of last night seriously. She picked up her phone from the table. 17% battery now. 3 missed calls from the unknown number that had started calling at 6. She looked at the number for a long moment, then she called it back. It rang once. A voice she didn't recognize, male, businesslike, with the specific careful neutrality of someone who'd been trained to sound like nothing in particular. Ms. Moretti, thank you for returning the call. My name is Agent Curtis Delaney. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit. I was hoping we could find a time to speak with you today regarding the Moretti Civic Trust. A pause. I want to be clear that at this stage, you're not a subject of our investigation. We believe you may be a material witness, but there are some time-sensitive aspects to the situation that I think you'd want to be aware of before my father's lawyers call you, she said. A brief pause. Yes, Agent Delaney said. That's accurate. She looked at Lucien across the table. He was watching her with an expression she had no name for. Not worry exactly, not calculation exactly, something that lived between them, in the space where the personal and the strategic had been blurring for 7 months. She thought about her father's voice, the smooth delivery of the announcement at the podium, the particular warmth with which he'd looked at Celine, the architectural precision of 8 years of transactions. The article that had gone live at 5:47 in the morning. She thought about sugar flowers, 342 of them. She thought about what it cost to make something beautiful for people who were counting on you not to look too closely at what they were doing while you worked. "Agent Delaney," she said, "I'll meet with you today, but I'll be bringing my own counsel." She kept her eyes on Lucien and Sands. "And I have documents I think you'll want to see." The agent's voice changed almost imperceptibly, a fraction of increased attention, the shift of someone who had just moved from introductory script to actual conversation. "That's very helpful, Ms. Moretti. Can I ask what kind of documents?" Ava looked at the tablet on the table, the account records, the transaction histories, the name Voss Meridian, the name Daniel Ferris, the web of it, all the careful architecture of her family's survival built on the assumption that she would always be too grateful, too damaged, too hungry for their approval to ever look, the kind, Ava said, that show exactly who built what and exactly whose name they put on it when they needed somewhere for it to disappear. She hung up. The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the river had gone from gray to a dull silver as the morning light increased, and a single tug was moving north against the current, slow and deliberate, engine working hard for every yard. Lucien was looking at her with that expression she still didn't have a name for. "I need a lawyer," she said. "Not your lawyer. Mine." "I know someone—" "Not yours," she said again. "Someone with no connection to you. Someone the federal investigators won't look at sideways because of who retained them." She picked up the tablet and started memorizing the account numbers. "And I need copies of everything on here, encrypted, somewhere my father's lawyers can't touch before I hand them to Delaney." Lucien moved. She'd seen him move with purpose before, that night in the subway station, the controlled efficiency of it. But this was different. This was the movement of someone who'd been waiting for a specific word, a specific signal, and had just received it. He crossed to the kitchen counter and picked up his own phone and made 2 calls in rapid succession, both brief, both in a register so low she caught only fragments. The second call lasted 11 seconds. He set the phone down. "There's a woman named Patricia Cho," he said. "She's an attorney. Criminal defense and financial crimes, 15 years. She's never lost a case that involved federal document subpoenas. She is not connected to me professionally. She's connected to me because I helped her brother get out of a bad situation 4 years ago, and she said if I ever needed something in return, it would have to be legal, and I said fine." He looked at her. "She can be here in 40 minutes. Ava thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. "Call her," she said. Patricia Cho arrived in 37 minutes, which told Ava something about the woman before she'd said a word. She was 50, small, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that gave nothing away as a matter of professional discipline. She wore a charcoal blazer over a dark shirt and carried a leather bag that looked like it had seen serious use over a long time. She looked at Ava's bruised face without comment, looked at Lucien with an expression that communicated a great deal in a short time, and sat down at the kitchen table and opened the bag. "Start from the beginning," she said. "Everything. Don't edit for my benefit." Ava started from the beginning. It took 40 minutes. Patricia Cho took notes by hand in a small, precise script and interrupted only twice, once to clarify a date, once to ask about the specific bank that had held the account when Ava was 19. At the end, she put down her pen and looked at the tablet for a long moment. "The subpoena," she said. "When Agent Delaney called, he said material witness, not subject." "Yes." "That's honest or it's strategic," Patricia said. "Either they genuinely believe you were used without knowledge, or they're keeping the door open to flip that designation depending on how cooperative you are." She tapped her pen against the notepad. "The documents on this tablet, how were they obtained?" A beat. Ava looked at Lucien. Patricia held up one hand. "I'm going to ask you to not answer that question in front of me," she said to Lucien. "And I'm going to proceed on the assumption that what's on this tablet is factually accurate and that questions about provenance are something we manage separately." She looked at Ava. The federal case doesn't need your documents to proceed. They have their own records. What your documents do is give you negotiating position. You walk in with corroborating evidence that demonstrates your cooperation and your knowledge, and the material witness designation stays a material witness designation. She paused. You do not call your father before this meeting. You do not call your sister. You do not respond to any communication from anyone in the Moretti family through any attorney they employ. My father is going to know within the hour that I called Delaney back, Ava said. Yes, Patricia said. He will. What does he do when he knows? Patricia looked at her steadily. He accelerates whatever he's been building to use against you. The article from this morning is the first layer. There will be more. She closed her notepad. Which is why we're meeting with Delaney today. This morning. Before your father's lawyers have time to fully deploy. She looked at Lucian. She can't go to this meeting from your building. Whatever happens after today, her being here cannot be the story. She needs to be somewhere clean. Lucian's jaw moved. There's an apartment on... Somewhere I can corroborate, Patricia said. Somewhere with a front desk and a camera and a record of her arriving by herself. A pause. Mara, Ava said. My employee. She has an apartment in Park Slope. She's been trying to reach me since last night. She looked at Patricia. If I go there, clean up, and we go to the meeting from there. That works, Patricia said. She was already standing, already repacking her bag. I'll set up the meeting for 11. That gives you 2 hours. Ava stood. She looked at Lucian. He was standing by the window with the morning light behind him, and she thought about everything that lived between them. The 3 years, the 7 months, the croissant because they'd run out of pain au chocolat. And none of it seemed reducible to anything she could say in the 60 seconds she had before Patricia Cho needed her to move. The documents, she said. I need them on something I can carry. He produced a drive from somewhere, small, black. She took it, and their hands overlapped for a moment, and she held the contact for a second longer than was necessary, and then she took the drive and stepped back. When this is over, she said. Yes, he said. She walked out of the apartment without looking back because looking back was a thing she was going to stop doing, starting now. The federal building on Lower Broadway was the kind of architecture that was designed to communicate permanence and authority, which it did, though by 11 in the morning, Ava had stopped registering it as anything other than a door she was walking through. Her ribs had stiffened further during the cab ride to Mara's apartment, and the subsequent effort of showering and changing into borrowed clothes, jeans, a dark sweater, flat shoes, and she'd taken 3 ibuprofen and was managing, which was not the same as not hurting, but was sufficient. Patricia walked her through security with the ease of someone who'd done this particular walk many times, signed them in, exchanged a professional nod with the agent at the desk. They were put in a conference room on the 4th floor. White walls, a long table, water in a plastic pitcher. The specific institutional quality of a space designed for conversations no one was comfortable having. Agent Curtis Delaney was 45, lean, with a handshake that was firm without being performative. His partner, Agent Solis, was younger and quieter and had a tablet she kept face down on the table until the conversation started. Ms. Moretti, Delaney said, thank you for coming in on short notice. My client is here voluntarily and in a cooperative capacity, Patricia said. I'd appreciate if we could keep the framing consistent with the material witness designation you communicated this morning. Absolutely, Delaney opened a folder. Miss Moretti, how familiar are you with the Moretti Civic Trust's operational accounts? Not very, Ava said, until approximately 12 hours ago. She put the drive on the table. Delaney looked at it, looked at her. I'd like to walk you through what's on that, she said. And then I'd like to tell you about an account that was opened in my name when I was 19 years old, which I did not authorize for any use beyond my own business purposes, and which I believe was used without my knowledge as a transit vehicle for the Trust's financial operations for approximately 14 months. Delaney's expression didn't change, but he reached for the drive. Let's start, he said, from the beginning. They were in the room for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Ava talked for most of it. Patricia intervened 7 times, twice, to redirect questions she flagged as outside the material witness scope, 5 times to clarify the framing of Ava's account. in ways that consistently emphasized the without my knowledge architecture that the defense would need. Delaney was good. He circled back to the same points from different angles, looking for inconsistencies, testing the edges of her account with the patient persistence of someone who'd learned that the second telling of something often looked different from the first. Ava told it the same way both times. Solis pulled up the drive's contents partway through, and the room's temperature changed slightly. A shift in attention, a quickening of the note-taking, and Ava understood that what Lucien's people had assembled was either confirming something they'd suspected or opening something they hadn't found yet. When it was over, Delaney closed his folder and looked at her for a moment. "I want to be clear about where we are," he said. "The material witness designation stands. What you've provided today is significant." He paused. "I also want to be clear that what you've provided creates some complexity for other parties in this investigation, and those parties may respond in ways that are uncomfortable." "My father," Ava said. Delaney said nothing. "How soon?" she said. "I'd encourage you," he said carefully, "to have counsel available and to be thoughtful about your communications over the next 24 hours. She understood. She stood up, and Patricia stood with her, and they walked out of the room and down the corridor and through the lobby and out onto Broadway, where the city was doing its ordinary Tuesday afternoon thing, people and cabs and the particular noise of a street that had never once stopped for any individual crisis. Patricia stopped on the sidewalk and looked at her. "You did well," she said. "Clean, consistent, detailed. They believed you." "Did it help?" "Yes." Patricia put on sunglasses. "Whether it helped enough depends on how fast your father moves and whether Voss Meridian's principals decide to cooperate or fight." She paused. "There's something else you should know. Before we went in, I got a call from a colleague who tracks federal filings. A protective motion was filed this morning by the Moretti family's legal team attempting to limit the scope of the trust subpoena. It names you." Ava looked at her. "It argues," Patricia said, "that any documentation you might provide has been obtained through improper means due to your alleged relationship with a figure under separate federal surveillance." She let that land. "They're not just discrediting you publicly. They're trying to poison your evidence in court. The sunlight on Broadway. The noise." "Separate federal surveillance," Ava said. "Lucien Vale has been a person of interest to 2 federal agencies for several years," Patricia said, without inflection. "That's not news to anyone who knows who he is. What it means for you is that anything you obtain through your connection to him becomes potentially tainted in a legal argument." She looked at her over the sunglasses. "The drive you handed them today? The provenance question I told you not to answer this morning. That question just became the central question." Ava thought about Lucien's face when she'd asked him about the documents. She thought about what he'd said. "I've been watching your family for 7 months." She'd understood, in the abstract, what that meant. People, surveillance, the particular resources of a man whose life operated in spaces where those things were available. She'd understood it and put it aside because she needed the information and she needed to move. She hadn't thought about what it cost her legally to use it. "What happens if the provenance question goes badly?" she said. "The documents get suppressed," Patricia said. "Your cooperation still stands. Your testimony is clean regardless. But the evidentiary value of what you brought in today collapses. And without independent corroboration, the case against the trust becomes harder to prosecute, which means your father's legal team achieves what they want, a long enough delay for the political connections to do their work." She paused. "It's a strong move, I'll give them that." Ava stood on the sidewalk in borrowed clothes with her bruised face and her damaged ribs, and looked at the middle distance where the city continued its indifferent forward motion. Her father had always been 4 moves ahead. She'd spent her entire life being one of his pieces. She looked at Patricia. "Is there another way to corroborate the documents? Something that doesn't involve the provenance question?" Patricia thought about it. "If the information on that drive leads investigators to records they can obtain independently, through their own subpoenas, their own sources, then the taint question becomes moot. The documents are just a roadmap. The destination is what matters." She paused. "Which means the question is whether what's on that drive points to something the federal investigation can find on its own fast enough." And if it does, Ava said, what do they find? Based on what I saw in that room today, Patricia said, they find Daniel Ferris, they find Voss Meridian, they find the Ashworth connection. She was quiet for a moment. And they find that the timing of the Ashworth marriage coinciding with the trust's restructuring is not coincidental. Celine. Ava thought about her sister's voice this morning. I didn't know about your account specifically, the specifically doing a great deal of work, the 3 years of knowing and saying nothing. She thought about 342 sugar flowers. She thought about her sister standing at the altar in white while Ava stood in silver at the back and felt grateful for the invitation. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from a number she didn't recognize, which she was beginning to understand was how her father operated when he didn't want the communication on any record that could be clearly attributed. It said, "Come home. We can fix this together. Whatever you've been told, there are things you don't understand. Come home and let me explain before you make a mistake you can't walk back." She showed it to Patricia without a word. Patricia read it. "Don't respond," she said. "I know," Ava said. Her phone buzzed again, same number. A second text. This one said, "Ava, I'm your father. Whatever else is true, I'm still your father. Please." She looked at it for a long time. She thought about the word please and what it cost a man like Robert Moretti to type it. Whether it cost him anything. Whether it was another move or whether somewhere inside the architecture of calculation there was a person who had looked up and realized at approximately 11:45 on a Tuesday morning that things were not going to go the way he'd planned them. She put the phone in her pocket. "I need to make a call," she said. "Not to—" "No," she said. "Not to my father." She walked 10 feet down the sidewalk and dialed Lucien. He picked up on the first ring. "The documents," she said. "The provenance question. My father's lawyers are going to use your surveillance activity to taint everything I gave Delaney this morning." A pause. "I know," he said. "I heard." She didn't ask how. "Is there another way in? Something the federal investigators can find on their own, without the drive, if they know where to look?" Silence. But not the silence of someone thinking. The silence of someone who had already thought about this and was deciding how to say what they'd decided. "There's a person," he said. "Who?" "Someone inside the Voss Meridian structure. A junior partner who's been uncomfortable with the arrangement for approximately 2 years and who has, on 2 occasions, asked people in my orbit whether there were options." He paused. "I've never approached him directly, because approaching him directly would have created exactly this kind of provenance problem. But if someone else approached him," she said, "if federal investigators approached him with the right questions, questions that were specific enough that he understood they already knew the shape of the thing, he might decide that his discomfort had reached its threshold." "What questions?" "Ask Delaney about the Meridian account in the Cayman structure, not the Delaware entity, the Cayman account. If he doesn't know it exists, the drive told him where to look. If he already knows it exists, his team is closer than I thought." A pause. "The junior partner's name is Owen Lassiter. He's been billing the trust account for 6 years and he's 31 years old, and he has a daughter, and I think he's been doing the math on what those 2 facts mean together for a while now." Ava absorbed this. "You've been building this," she said. "Not just protecting me. Building the whole thing. A place for all of it to land." He didn't answer. "How long?" she said. A beat. "Since April," he said. 7 months ago, when I found out about the account with your name on it." She stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and felt the scale of it. Not just the emotional weight, which was enormous, but the sheer structural weight of 7 months of a man moving pieces she couldn't see toward a conclusion she hadn't known was coming. She didn't know how to feel about it. She didn't have time to figure it out right now. "I'm going back in," she said. "I'm going to give Delaney the Cayman account and Owen Lassiter's name. Yes. And when this is done, he said, "we'll have a different conversation than the one we've been having." "That's not a plan, Lucien." "No," he said. "It's a promise." She ended the call and turned back to Patricia. "I need to go back in," she said. Patricia looked at her. "The Cayman account," Ava said. "I have another name." They went back in. The second meeting was shorter and sharper. Delaney's expression when she mentioned the Cayman structure shifted in a way that confirmed what Lucian had suspected. They didn't know it yet, or had it only partially, and the specific account designation she provided clicked something into place. When she said Owen Lassiter's name, Solis wrote it down without looking up, with the speed of someone writing down something they'd been waiting for. They were out by 1:30. The cold had deepened. The wind off the Hudson was finding its way up the cross streets, and Ava stood outside the federal building in borrowed clothes and felt the specific quality of having done a thing that couldn't be undone. The drive was in federal hands. The names were in federal hands. Delaney had her cell number and Patricia's number and had said, in the careful language of a man who couldn't promise anything specifically, that the material witness designation was robust and the cooperation had been noted. Her father's lawyers would know within hours. She thought about the article from this morning, the erratic, the troubled daughter, the history of instability, the anonymous family sources who were almost certainly her mother, her father, possibly Celine's new husband's people, all of them describing a woman they'd constructed from the parts of her that were most useful to their story. Her phone rang. Not a text. A call. She looked at the screen. Her mother. She stood there in the cold with the phone buzzing in her hand and thought about every version of this call she'd ever received. The calls that started with a concern and became an accusation. The calls that started with "love you, sweetheart," and ended with, "but you really need to think about how you're affecting this family." The calls she'd driven home from, or walked home from, or sat in bathroom stalls to decompress from, pressing her back against the cold tile until she remembered how to breathe. She picked up. Ava, her mother's voice. Vivian Moretti at 62, a woman who had never in Ava's memory shown a visible crack, controlled in the way of someone for whom control was the highest form of self-expression. "I need you to come home." "No," Ava said. A pause. The word apparently required absorption. "Your father is—" "I know what Dad is doing," Ava said. "I know what both of you have been doing. I spoke to federal investigators this morning, and I gave them everything Lucian's people gathered on the trust accounts. And I gave them 2 additional leads that I'm told will be sufficient to build an independent case." She paused. "So whatever you were going to say, I want you to know that before you say it." The silence on her mother's end was unlike any silence she'd heard from Vivian Moretti before. Not the controlled silence of someone managing information. Something different, something that had edges. "You don't know what you've done," her mother said. "I think I do. You've destroyed your family." "My family," Ava said, "destroyed itself. I was just the place they were going to put the damage when it arrived." Her voice stayed level. She hadn't planned for it to be level. She'd have expected from herself something more ragged. "I'm done being where you put things, Mom." "Ava, don't call me again today," she said. "Have your lawyers call Patricia Cho." She ended the call. Her hands were shaking. She looked at them, her calloused baker's hands steady under the weight of 100 finished cakes, trembling slightly now in the cold air of Lower Broadway. And she thought that was probably correct. That the shaking was the correct response to a morning that had started with her father's manipulative text and ended with her mother's voice telling her she'd destroyed her family, and that somewhere between those 2 things she had handed a federal agent a drive full of evidence and given them the name of a man named Owen Lassiter, who had a daughter and had been doing the math. Patricia appeared beside her. "How are you?" Patricia said. "Functional," Ava said. "That's enough for today." Patricia looked at her. "Go somewhere safe. Don't make any public statements. Don't post anything. Don't respond to the article." She paused. "Your father is going to escalate in the next few hours. Whatever that looks like, you need to be somewhere that isn't reachable." "Lucien's building." "With the security?" Patricia nodded. "Yes." Ava looked up the street. The city was doing its thing. A delivery truck was double parked and a cab was honking, and a woman was walking a dog who was deeply uninterested in the pace she was trying to maintain. All of it ordinary. All of it indifferent to the specific shape of the last 16 hours. She called a car. She was on the FDR, moving north, when her phone buzzed with a notification she hadn't set up and didn't recognize. An alert from a financial news service she'd been subscribed to years ago and forgotten about. She looked at it. Moretti Civic Trust accounts frozen. Pending federal review. Sources say documents obtained this morning triggered emergency order. Then, 30 seconds later, another notification. This one from a social media aggregator she also barely used, AVA Moretti. The real story. Multiple sources contradict family account of troubled daughter. Federal case context emerging. The car moved through traffic. Her phone kept buzzing. She turned the screen face down on the seat beside her and looked out the window at the river running parallel to the highway. The same river she'd watched from Lucien Huyen's window that morning, going the same direction it always went, south and relentless, and not waiting for anyone to decide whether they were ready. The accounts were frozen. She'd done that. She hadn't known she was going to, not when she'd dialed Delaney back in the early morning, not when she'd walked into the federal building, not when she'd handed over the drive. She'd known she needed to protect herself. She'd known she was done being the convenient fall position. But somewhere in the sequence of those decisions, she'd also detonated something that 24 hours ago had been her family. The car hit traffic near the 79th Street exit, stopped. Her phone buzzed again. She turned it over. Lucien, the trust freeze is public. Your father is going to move in the next hour. I need you to... The text ended there. Incomplete. Like something had interrupted the sending of it. She stared at the cut-off sentence, called him, went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. The car sat in traffic on the FDR with the river on her left and Manhattan's east face rising on her right, and Ava Moretti sat in the back seat with her damaged ribs and her bruised face and her borrowed clothes and felt the specific chill of a cut-off sentence from a man who always finished his sentences. She texted back, Lucien, what's happening? The typing indicator appeared. Stayed, then disappeared. Nothing came through. She looked out the window at the stopped traffic ahead. Then she looked at her phone again and did the thing she'd been doing all morning, making a decision before she'd fully thought it through, which she was starting to understand was not recklessness, but a different kind of intelligence, the kind that recognized when thinking was just delay wearing a responsible face. She called Patricia. Something's happening with Lucien, she said when Patricia picked up. He sent me a message that cut off and now he's not picking up. What does it mean if they moved on him today, specifically today, while the trust case is... It means, Patricia said, with the careful flatness of a woman who'd worked federal cases for 15 years, that your father found a way to use the second investigation to complicate the first. The traffic started moving. How? Ava said. By giving the second investigation something they wanted more than the trust case. If your father's lawyers went to the agency that's been watching Vail and offered them a cooperative witness who could provide documentation on Vail's operations in exchange for... Stop, Ava said. She stopped herself. She thought about it. Her father at the podium, the champagne, the 400 guests, the announcement about the apartment delivered with the smooth precision of a man completing a task. Her father had always been 4 moves ahead. She was on move 3. She was on move 3. And Lucien in Vail, who had spent 7 months building the architecture of her protection without telling her, was not answering his phone. Patricia, she said, what happens to the federal case against the trust if I withdraw my cooperation? A long pause. Ava, what happens? The material witness designation, what happens to the case? It weakens significantly without your testimony, Patricia said, but it doesn't collapse. The documents stand regardless of... But without my testimony, the provenance question on the documents becomes the central issue again. Yes. And if the documents get suppressed, the case slows down. Yes. And if the case slows down, the political connections have time to work. Yes, Patricia said very quietly. That's the architecture. The car moved up the FDR, past the 90s, past where the road curved and the bridge came into view, the suspension cables against the gray sky. Ava thought about what her father had built. She thought about what it meant that he was apparently willing to hand Lucien to a federal agency, like a card played from a sleeve, the smooth transactional logic of it. I give you this man, you give me time, and the daughter becomes the leverage point in the middle. She thought about Lucien's hands when he touched her face in the dark of the subway station. She thought about 7 months of a man building something she couldn't see, to protect someone who hadn't asked. She thought about what it meant to choose, not to survive the choice, to make it. "Patricia," she said. "Yes." "I'm not withdrawing." A pause. "Even if—" "I'm not withdrawing," she said again. "But I need you to find out, right now, exactly what federal agency has been watching Lucien Vale and who the senior officer is on that investigation, because I think my father just made the most expensive trade of his life, and I want to be in the room when it decides to collect on that trade." Patricia was quiet for 3 full seconds. "Give me 20 minutes, she said. The car reached the Riverside Drive exit, and Ava told the driver to keep going north. She didn't know where she was going yet. She just needed to be moving, needed the city sliding past the windows, needed the particular momentum of a vehicle in motion while she waited for her phone to tell her something she could act on. 15 minutes later, Patricia called back. "The agency watching Vale is a joint task force," she said. "FBI financial crimes cross-designated with organized crime. The senior officer is a man named Frank Caruso. He's been building a case on Vale for 3 years. A pause. He's also the officer who received a call from the Moretti family legal team at 9:47 this morning. An hour after Ava had walked into the federal building. An hour after the trust accounts had started to move toward freezing. What did they offer him? Ava said. I don't know exactly. But Caruso's task force filed an expedited material request at 10:15 this morning referencing Vale by name, and at approximately 12:30, Vale's primary associate, a man named Brennan who runs his security operations, was detained for questioning at Vale's office building. Brennan. She didn't know the name, but she understood its weight. If Lucien's primary security operator had been pulled, whoever remained in that office was operating blind. Where is Lucien? She said. I don't know. His attorneys are presumably mobilizing. The detention of the associate is probably a pressure move, Caruso trying to shake the structure loose before Vale's legal team gets fully organized. Patricia paused. Ava, I want to be clear about something. What happens to Lucien Vale in the context of Caruso's investigation is not— I know it's not your case, Ava said. It's not your case either. Your cooperation with Delaney is what protects you. Whether Vale— I know, she said. I know what it is and what it isn't. She looked out the window at the gray sky above the tree line of Riverside Park. My father offered Caruso something specific, something that was worth making a move today, when everything else was already in motion. What would be worth that? Patricia was quiet. Documentation, Ava said slowly. My father has documentation on Vale's operations, something he's been holding, something he got access to because Vale's been watching his family, and my father found out and— She stopped. He's been watching Lucien too. That would be consistent with how Robert Moretti operates, Patricia said, which means there's a file somewhere in the Moretti legal structure, passed to Caruso's team this morning as the trade. She pressed her fingers against the cold window glass. If that file reaches the task force before Vale's attorneys can respond, the expedited material request could be executed today, Patricia said. Yes. How do I stop it? Ava, Patricia, how do I stop it? The pause this time was long and had a different texture. Not reluctance, exactly, more the pause of a woman recalibrating the shape of the conversation she'd thought she was having. You'd need to speak to Caruso directly, Patricia said finally. Not Delaney, Caruso. And you'd need to offer him something that makes the Moretti trade less attractive than whatever he's been offered. What do I have that Caruso wants more than what my father gave him? I don't know, Patricia said, but I'd suggest you figure that out before you walk into a room with him, because Caruso has been building this case for 3 years, and he's not going to set it aside for sentiment. I don't have sentiment, Ava said. I have a complete picture of every financial transaction my father has made through the trust for 8 years, corroborated by a source inside Voss Meridian, who is almost certainly already on the phone with Delaney. And I have the specific structure of how the Ashworth family's political connections were used to insulate those transactions from federal scrutiny. A pause. The Ashworth angle, Patricia said carefully, connects the trust case to a political protection network that Caruso's task force almost certainly cares about as much as they care about Vale. Possibly more. Set up the meeting, Ava said. He won't agree to... Tell him I have documentation showing that the political network protecting the Moretti Trust also provided cover for 3 other organized crime-adjacent financial operations in the last 4 years. Tell him I have that from the same source inside Voss Meridian. She paused. Tell him that if he executes the material request from my father's legal team before he talks to me, he's going to walk into a congressional oversight hearing in 18 months explaining why he took a trade from a compromised source instead of waiting 60 minutes. Silence. You don't know if that's true, Patricia said. I know enough of it is true that the risk calculation works, Ava said. The Ashworth connection is real. The political network is real. Whether the Voss Meridian source has specifically documented the other 3 operations, I don't know. But Caruso doesn't know that I don't know. Another pause. Longer. I'm going to pretend, Patricia said slowly, that you didn't ask me to help you bluff a federal officer. I'm asking you to set up a meeting. Give me 30 minutes. Ava told the driver to stop. She got out on Riverside Drive at 116th Street in front of the park wall and stood in the cold with her phone in her hand and looked at the bare trees inside the park boundary, their branches against the sky like something fractured and deliberate. She called Lucien again. Voicemail. She waited. She thought about the morning. All of it, start to finish, the way you'd review the architectural drawings of a building after the building had been altered, the meeting with Patricia, the federal building, Delaney's careful language, Solis writing down Owen Lassiter's name, the notification about the trust accounts, the cut-off text message, her father at the podium, the champagne. She thought about what it cost to build something the way her father had built it, the patience, the precision, the sustained willingness to treat the people closest to you as instruments rather than people. She thought about what kind of man that required. She thought about whether he'd always been that man, or whether he'd become him gradually, the way water shapes stone, not through violence but through repetition, each small choice eroding something that had once been a different shape. She didn't know. She found she didn't need to. Patricia called back in 22 minutes. Caruso will meet you, she said. 4 o'clock. Not at the federal building. He wants neutral ground. There's a conference room at a law firm on Park Avenue that both his office and mine have used before. I'll text you the address. Is the material request on hold? He said pending the meeting. Went to pause. Ava, he's going to be looking for a reason to proceed with what your father gave him. Don't give him one. I won't. And whatever happens in that room, whatever he tells you about Vale's case, you are there as a material witness in the trust investigation. You are not there as anyone's advocate. The moment you cross that line, your cooperation agreement becomes complicated. I understand. She didn't promise she'd stay on the right side of the line. She thought Patricia understood that. The law firm's conference room was on the 32nd floor and had a view of Midtown that would have been impressive at any other moment. Ava sat across from Frank Caruso at 4:03 in the afternoon and looked at a man who had spent 3 years building something and could feel it in the way he held himself. A certain weight of accumulated work, the particular solidity of someone who had staked a professional decade on a specific outcome. He was 53, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had seen enough to be done being surprised by most things. He had a folder in front of him and a legal pad and a pen he didn't pick up. Patricia sat beside Ava. Caruso's deputy, a younger man named Ellis, sat beside Caruso. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then Caruso said, "You want to talk about the Ashworth network?" "I want to talk about why the trade my father offered you this morning is worth less than what you'll get if you wait," Ava said. Caruso looked at her with the careful attention of a man recalibrating who he was dealing with. "Your father's documentation on Vale," she continued, "comes from surveillance my father conducted through the Moretti legal structure, which means it was obtained by a man currently under active federal investigation, which means his credibility as a source is going to be interrogated in every subsequent proceeding." She held his gaze. "The Voss Meridian source who is currently speaking to Agent Delaney has documentation on 4 financial operations that used the same political protection network the Ashworths provided for the trust. 2 of those operations have connections to individuals your task force has been watching for longer than you've been watching Lucian Vale. Caruso was very still. I want to be precise, Ava said. I'm not here to protect Vale from a legitimate investigation. I'm here to tell you that the trade my father offered you this morning was designed to slow the trust case down by creating complexity around your task force's simultaneous use of a cooperating witness and a compromised source. And I'm telling you that if you execute the material request before the trust case is fully built, you hand the Moretti legal team the argument they need to create enough procedural noise that the political network walks. Caruso looked at Patricia. Patricia looked back at him with the expression of a woman who had said everything she intended to say before entering the room. He looked at Ava again. The Voss Meridian source, he said. He's giving Delaney specific names, connected to the Ashworth network. That's my understanding, Ava said. 4 operations. That's what I've been told. A pause. And you came here, Caruso said slowly, to tell me that the Moretti documentation on Vale is a trap. I came here to tell you, she said, that my father has spent 40 years being 4 moves ahead of everyone in the room, and that this morning, for the first time, someone was in the room who knew what the 4 moves were. She paused. He offered you Vale because Vale is the more attractive headline, and because using your task force to neutralize Vale while his own case is in motion is exactly the kind of leverage play he's been making his entire career. She kept her hands flat on the table. Don't let him make it. Caruso was quiet for a long time, long enough that the light through the windows shifted slightly as a cloud moved across the afternoon sun. Then he picked up his pen. The material request, he said to Ellis, goes back to pending, indefinitely. He wrote something on the legal pad without looking up. Tell Delaney I want a full briefing on the Voss Meridian testimony by 6 tonight. He looked at Ava. You should know, he said, that this doesn't close the Vale investigation. Nothing you've said today closes it. I know, she said. We're going to continue working that case through legitimate channels. Whatever documentation your father provided, we're going to evaluate it independently before we decide what to do with it. That's all I'm asking, she said. Caruso nodded once and stood and left the room with Ellis without another word, which was fine, which was the right ending to that particular conversation. Patricia let out a breath that was not quite a sigh. Don't ever do that again, she said. Did it work? Today it worked. Patricia gathered her things. Come on, you look like you need to sit down somewhere that isn't a government-adjacent conference room. They were in the elevator when Ava's phone finally rang. Lucienne. She stepped to the back of the elevator and answered. I've been calling you for 4 hours, she said. I know. His voice was level. Whatever had been happening for the last 4 hours had been processed and filed in whatever interior space he maintained for things that had happened and couldn't be unhappened. My phone was with Brennan when they pulled him. I just got it back. Brennan's out? An hour ago. They didn't have enough to hold him past the initial questioning. A pause. I heard what you did with Caruso. She blinked. How? I have a person in the building. A brief silence. Ava. Don't, she said, not on the phone. No, I know. She could hear him breathing. Tonight, whenever you're ready. I'll come to you, she said. The elevator reached the lobby. She went to him. They sat in the kitchen where they'd been that morning. The same table, the same view of the river, the same city doing its indifferent thing outside the windows. And she told him everything from the point where his text message had cut off to the moment she'd stepped out of the elevator on Park Avenue. He listened the way he listened, without interrupting, without the small verbal affirmations people used to signal attention, just complete still focus that she'd always found simultaneously unnerving and rare. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Caruso, he said, he's not going to stop. I know. The investigation continues. Whatever I've been doing, legally or otherwise, he's going to keep building. I know that too, she said. I didn't go in there to close your case. I went in there to stop my father from using it as a weapon today. He looked at her. That distinction matters, she said. I need you to understand that I know the difference between what you are and what I needed today. I'm not confused about it. No, he said. You're not confused about anything. He said it not as a compliment exactly, but as an observation, the specific recognition of a person seeing something clearly for the first time. You weren't, even in the subway station, even with your lips split open and your ribs done. You were scared, but you weren't confused. She looked at the table. My father is going to be indicted, she said. The trust case is solid enough now that his lawyers can slow it, but they can't stop it. Voss Meridian is going to fall apart when Lassiter testifies. Daniel Ferris is probably already looking at his options. She paused. Henry Ashworth's family is going to spend the next 2 years in congressional oversight. Celine, she stopped. Celine, Lucian said carefully. She looked at the river. Celine knew, she said. 3 years. And she chose the wedding over telling me. She felt the shape of it. Not the hot anger from this morning, but something colder and more permanent, the specific weight of understanding that settled once the adrenaline finished. She's not a criminal. She was afraid, and she made the choice afraid people make. A pause. I understand it. I don't know if I can forgive it yet. Lucienne didn't offer her anything about forgiveness. She was grateful for that. Your mother called this afternoon, he said. While you were with Caruso, she left a message with my building. Ava looked at him. She said she needed you to know that the article this morning was your father's decision, not hers. He paused. She said she told him not to do it. She sat with that. Do you believe her? Ava said. I don't know your mother. Do you believe people who didn't stop something get credit for not wanting it to happen? He was quiet for a long time. No, he said. Not by itself. No. She nodded. I'm going to the bakery tomorrow, she said. Mara has been running it since last night, and there are 3 orders due by end of week, and the colache dough needs to be started by 6 in the morning. She looked at the table. I need to go back to work. I know. Whatever happens next, the case, the family, all of it, I need to be in my kitchen while it happens. I need something that's mine and not... She gestured vaguely at the space around them, meaning not just the apartment, but everything it represented. I need to be where I built something. Yes, he said. She looked at him. He was watching her with that expression she'd spent years trying to name and had finally given up naming because some things between people lived below the waterline of language, and the best you could do was acknowledge them without demanding they surface. You started coming to Nocturne for the wrong reasons, she said. Yes? And you stayed for the right ones. Yes. And you spent 7 months doing something enormous that you should have told me about. Yes, he said. And I'm not going to apologize for it in a way that misrepresents what I'd do differently if I had it again. I'd tell you sooner. I wouldn't stop doing it. She looked at him for a long time. I know, she said. Outside the windows, the city had gone from afternoon gray to the specific dark blue of early winter evening, the moment before the lights became the dominant thing, when the buildings were still visible as shapes against the sky and hadn't yet dissolved into their own illumination. The river was invisible now, but she knew it was there, moving south, constant, not waiting for anyone. The first time I made croissants, she said, I was 60. My mother was hosting a brunch and the caterer canceled, and she told me to figure something out. I'd never made croissants. I stayed up until 2 in the morning watching videos and trying to understand laminated dough, and I ruined the first 3 batches. The 4th batch was... She paused. They weren't perfect, but they were real. They tasted like I'd actually made them, not like I'd bought them somewhere and was pretending. Lucian said nothing. My mother looked at them on the table, Ava said. And then she looked around at her guests and said she'd found the most darling bakery in the village. She let the silence sit for a moment. I was standing right there. The city outside continued darkening. I kept making things, she said. I don't know if that's resilience or if it's just not knowing what else to be, but I kept making things. It's not a small thing, he said, to keep making things. She looked at him. No, she said. I know. She stayed that night. Not in the way that would have felt like surrender, not in the way that erased the morning's conversation, or the 3 years before it, or the specific complicated territory of what they were to each other. She slept in the same room she'd slept in the night before, with the river beyond the glass, and for the first time in longer than she could specifically locate, she slept without one ear tuned to the frequency of danger. In the morning, she was up at 5:15. She found him already in the kitchen, which didn't surprise her. Coffee made. He'd found eggs somewhere, and there was toast and the specific ordinary miracle of breakfast that someone had made before you woke up, which she registered and didn't comment on because some things didn't need commentary. She ate. He drank his coffee and read something on his phone, and the kitchen was quiet, in a way that wasn't tense but was simply the silence of two people who had run out of things to perform for each other. "I'm going to need a lawyer for the next few months," she said. "Patricia is good, but she's criminal defense. I'm going to need someone for the civil side of whatever the family does when the indictment hits. I know someone." "Not yours," she said. "Not mine," he agreed. "I'll send you 3 names. Independent. Your choice." She looked at her coffee. "The bakery accounts. If the federal investigation references them, there's going to be a period where—" "Your business is clean," he said. "Whatever shows up on the trust side, Nocturne's current accounts are 8 years removed from any connection, and Patricia can document the gap clearly." He paused. "You built something clean, Ava. That doesn't disappear because of what your father did when you were 19. She looked at him. He held her gaze without adding anything to it. "Okay," she said. She left at 6:30. He walked her to the lobby because she didn't tell him not to. The doorman had the same expression he'd had when she'd arrived 2 nights ago. Professional, uninflected, exactly no information given. Outside it was dark still, the city in that pre-dawn mode of garbage trucks and early runners, and the particular population of people who began their day, while everyone else was still horizontal. She stopped on the sidewalk. "I'm going to be in the middle of a federal case for a year," she said. "Maybe more. My family is going to be in the news in a way that my name is attached to it, whether I want it to be or not. And you—" She paused. "Whatever Caruso's investigation looks like from here, it's not done." "No," Lucian said. "None of it is done. So I want to say something while it's still morning and I haven't had enough time to talk myself out of it." He waited. "I stopped because I was afraid," she said. 3 years ago, I told myself it was principle, but it was fear. I was afraid of what it meant to choose something that didn't fit the version of myself I was trying to build." She looked at him. "I was also afraid that if I stayed close enough to see what you actually were, not the surface of it, the actual thing, I might not be able to leave, and I didn't know yet who I was without the option to leave." The street around them, the pre-dawn city, a cab passing without slowing. "Now I know," she said, "and I'm still standing here." He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the subway station and in the kitchen and across the table from Patricia Cho and across a federal conference room table in her memory. That look she'd never fully decoded and had finally stopped trying to. "Go to your bakery," he said. "I'm going." "The kolache dough." "I know." She turned and walked. She didn't look back, not because she was done, but because she was going somewhere, which was different. There was a direction to the walking now that there hadn't been when she'd run out of the hotel in a silver dress. She moved through the early dark of Riverside Drive toward the subway entrance half a block down, and the city around her was its ordinary, enormous self. Not caring, not hostile, not offering anything. And she walked into it without needing it to offer anything. The subway car was mostly empty at that hour. A man asleep at one end, a woman with headphones and a bag of grocery store flowers. A kid in a uniform looking at his phone. Ava stood at the door and held the rail and watched the tunnel walls go past. She thought about what she was going back to. The bakery, which smelled like butter and sugar and the specific dark note of good chocolate at a particular temperature. The back office she'd been sleeping in, which she was going to stop sleeping in because she could afford a real apartment and had been refusing to get one as a form of punishment she hadn't consciously chosen. Mara, who had been running Nocturne alone since the night of the wedding and deserved a raise and would probably accept a pastry as partial payment. The kolache dough. The 3 orders due by end of week. The refrigerator full of couverture chocolate and the shelf of Madagascar vanilla, and the battered notebook where she wrote new formulas in handwriting that only she could read. She thought about her mother's message to Lucien's building. It wasn't your father's decision, which was the kind of thing that took years to work out. Not today, not this week, maybe not this year. But the door of it was there, and she knew where the door was. She thought about Celine, the white dress. 3 years of knowing, the specifically. She thought about what it cost two women to be raised by the same people and come out shaped so differently by the same damage. She didn't have clarity on Celine yet. She suspected clarity would take longer than the trust case. She thought about Owen Lassiter, 31 years old, with a daughter, doing the math. She didn't know what he'd decided. She'd probably never know, specifically. But she understood the math he'd been doing, and she understood the moment when the math changed from abstract to personal, and she thought that was probably the right kind of moment to be in when you were making an irreversible choice. The train surfaced briefly in Brooklyn into gray early light. She could see the skyline behind her from the window. Manhattan, still lit, the towers against a sky that was turning from black to the particular dark blue that meant the sun was on its way. She thought about Lucien in his kitchen with his coffee and the toast he'd made before she woke up. She thought about a man who had come into her bakery 3 years ago because of her father, and stayed because of her, and had spent 7 months watching from close enough to build something, and hadn't told her because he was afraid of the same thing she'd been afraid of. That if she knew the shape of it, she might need to decide whether to stay, and he hadn't been ready to watch her choose. She understood that. She didn't excuse it entirely. She understood it. The train went back underground. Nocturne was dark when she arrived at 6:48. She used her key. The shop had that specific quality of a closed space that held the ghosts of what it had been. Flour dust and sugar, and the faint warm residue of the ovens from whatever Mara had baked yesterday. She turned on the lights in the kitchen and found everything where it should be, and found also a note on the counter in Mara's handwriting. 3 orders on track. Couverture is in the second shelf. Someone from a magazine called about a feature. I told them you'd been busy. Call me when you surface. M. Ava stood in her kitchen in borrowed clothes with her bruised face and her calloused hands, and looked at the note for a long time. Then she put on her apron. She filled the standing mixer. She began. Outside, the sun came up over Brooklyn the way it always did, without ceremony, without asking whether anyone was ready, simply arriving. The light came through the bakery's small east-facing window and fell across the stainless steel counter in a long rectangle, warming the surface slowly. Ava worked in it and around it, moving from refrigerator to counter to oven in the rhythm she'd built over 8 years, the rhythm that was hers in the specific way that things you build from scratch are yours, not given, not inherited, not contingent on anyone's approval. The dough came together. She pressed it with her palms and felt the give of it, the resistance, the way good dough pushed back just enough to tell you it was alive. Her ribs still hurt. Her face still hurt. She worked anyway. At 7:40, her phone lit up on the counter. She looked at it without stopping what she was doing. A news alert. Moretti Civic Trust accounts remain frozen as federal investigation expands to include Ashworth family connections. Sources say cooperating witness testimony cited. She looked at it for a moment. Then she turned the phone face down and kept working. The kolache dough needed another 20 minutes. She had orders due by end of week. She had a magazine to call back, apparently. She had a year of federal proceedings and family wreckage, and the long, unglamorous work of separating herself from a structure that had been built partly on her compliance. And she would do all of it. She would do it with Patricia's help, and with her own stubbornness, and with the specific durability of someone who had survived being invisible for long enough to know that invisibility wasn't the same as being destroyed. And some evenings, when the bakery was closed and the orders were done, and the city outside was doing its indifferent glittering, she would call a number she no longer had any reason to delete, and he would answer on the first ring, and they would talk, or they wouldn't. Sometimes silence between two people who'd been through something together was its own form of conversation. And outside whatever window she was sitting near, Manhattan would do what it always did. Roar on, lit up, not waiting, enormous and uncaring, and also, in its way, entirely alive. The oven timer went off. Ava Moretti pulled on her mitts, opened the oven door, and took out what she'd made. It was good. She knew it was good before she tasted it, the way you knew after long enough. Not from arrogance, but from the accumulated knowledge of a person who had failed at something 1,000 times and learned what success felt like in the hands. She set it on the rack to cool, opened the next order ticket, began again.